I am Simon Gutt for Finance Malta here at the Malta Financial Services Authority, speaking to its chairman, Professor Joseph Bannister. The bulk of investment funds registered in Malta are professional investor funds, I believe, and they are thus subject to the AIFM directive. How is the MFSA preparing to apply the provisions of this directive?
The directive is introducing certain practices that we were one of the few jurisdictions who actually regulate the fund. I mean, the fund has to do compliance reporting. Where necessary, we visit even the offices of the fund and ensure that they are complying with their investment policies, the boards are meeting, etc. Obviously, the directive now brings in certain new elements like the custodian. It brings in what they call, they use a French word, the valuator, which is a valuation, independent valuation. It places more onus on the manager, so the manager is more regulated. We're at the stage where the directive has gone through Parliament. It still has another 2 years to come in place, end of 2012. And now we're at the phase of the implementing measures, which unfortunately there are about 92. We participate in the groups that are implementing. Sometimes I go there myself because of the importance to the country. And hopefully certain things will be smoothed out because there are lots of new things in terms of what the manager is not used to, basically.
And this presumably is, apart from entering the regulations, will then need also to be communicated to the managers?
Yes, in fact recently we just had an international meeting where essentially both UCITS 4 and the directive were explained. It was intended for local audience. I mean, local audience was in the majority. I would like to have seen other managers participating, but it's entirely up to them. In implementing this, we're a bit fortunate because the way our legal system works, we can do it through rules. So
which simplifies the process.
Which simplifies certain processes. So we have to see eventually, after we finish the implementation of UCITS 4, which is also through rules, then we start looking after the summer how to implement this directive and the best way forward.
It might be an idea to explain the difference between a UCITS and a professional investor fund.
That's not very easy. The issue, one easy straight answer is that the UCITS have a large number of investment restrictions, right, where essentially in the case of the hedge funds, the investment restrictions are defined by the manager. Right. So essentially that's why the level of entry is not as low as UCITS, where in UCITS you can have an entry down to 500 euros. The entry into the hedge funds in the Maltese system, because the Maltese system has 3 classes, and it's about 10,000, 100,000 and 1 million. And there the entry, then the onus is on the definition of the investor. What type of investor. These now obviously in the light of certain changes taking place even in Europe, and in the case of more transparency, the MFSA is looking at the redefinition of these type of investors.
While talking about this and in alternative investment funds, is private equity considered separately to?
Private equity essentially normally is considered separate. Largely because the nature of their investment, because basically they are investing into companies. In fact, the directive actually traps all types of funds, so private equity, property funds, etc. What is a little bit unclear and we have to sort out in the implementing measures is why private equity should be subjected to a depository. Or the case of property funds. Do they need a depository? Because there is something physical.
Yes, you are not talking about financial assets,
that's
you're
right.
talking about physical
assets. Yeah. You're talking about physical assets, but that's what the directive says.
In this context, are private equity firms, private equity funds treat treated differently under Maltese regulation?
No, they still have to have the fund manager, which has to be properly regulated. But it depends what type of structure they select. I mean, some of the private equity essentially tends to be limited partnerships, and the law takes care of that. But there is always a manager, and the manager has to be regulated. Now, whether it's the general manager who's the partner, or whether it's an independent manager, the manager is always regulated.
I believe the UCITS 4 does extend a certain of the new rules on the roles of depositories from the IFM 2.
Not yet. The UCITS requires the depository to be in the country where the fund is domiciled.
Right.
And that's what the hedge fund directive, the AFMD, essentially requires as well. What is different in UCITS 4, and we're at the implementation phase, there are 4 key areas, one being the management company passporting, because the management company can now passport. Then the structures where you can merge UCITS funds. Then there is the master feeder structure, where you can have the master in a jurisdiction like Malta, which is becoming a fund's domicile, and then the feeder being in the different jurisdictions. And then ultimately the client information, where that now has been much more simplified, although obviously there are transparency requirements as to what should be included in that. Then there are the minor things. In effect, now the passporting is done through electronic transmission, so to facilitate matters.
To flip back to the custodian, you mentioned the custodian has to be in the same jurisdiction.
In UCITS, yes, that's already here. And today there are a number of UCITS where there is a primary custodian here and then a sub-custodian somewhere else, usually the sub-custodian being a global custodian. There is a consultation going on the custodian in UCITS. In the case of the directive, I think as a result of certain situations, particularly Madoff, the question of liability of the depository has come to the forefront. And the issue there is that the primary custodian so far is always liable. We've moved further by saying that where there is force majeure, that's fine. Where there are mitigating circumstances, but these still have to be defined. Mitigating circumstances could be anything. However, whatever happens, it's still the primary custodian that has to justify that he was not responsible.
Yeah, of course.
So there are a few weeks ahead where essentially some really tough discussions to sort this out.
As you point out, a lot of the recent directives require funds to produce a lot of documentation, reporting information. It's not always necessarily clear to start off with how much information is correct and what simple would be. It can become a complex issue. Do the regulations put forward the concept of the investment managers, the investment promoters, have some sort of duty of care towards their customers?
Well, yes, of course. That's in the MFSA rules, and they also have a duty to provide all the necessary information. The issue is always the competencies of the people who are carrying out the work. Now they pass through the competence regime. But obviously, then it's entirely up to them. I mean, the MFSA does not run the fund. No, the fund is run by the manager, the administrator, the custodian, and they have to keep everything up to scratch and report to the MFSA.
It can prove hard to explain an investment policy sometimes in plain language.
No, I would disagree with that. The investment policies have to be clear as a matter of transparency in the offering memorandum. The question is, who reads the offering memorandum,
yes.
and how the manager or the intermediary explains the investment policy to the investing public.
Will the MFSA be providing practitioners with any guidance on what constitutes clear language?
Yeah,
for
but
example?
that's in the, well, one, that's in the rules. Two, we vet every prospectus that
Right.
goes out. So I think we can't be a little bit more clear than that. Obviously, there is the consumer complaints. Consumers are free to come and ask for not investment advice. Unfortunately, sometimes they think we should be giving investment advice. But in terms of, you know, whether things are clear or not, we do vet. Even if we see an advert and we say the advert is not clear, we do call the manager's attention that certain things are not properly explained. There has to be a little bit of an element of self-regulation here. And that's why there are rules, and they have to obey the rules. Otherwise, the MFSA will end up running everything. So it's not an investment manager.
Well,
so.
in something like this anyway, you can't lay down exactly the language to be
Yes,
used,
I
because
mean
that will
the
change from
issue
fund to
always,
fund.
for example, the rules say you have to use a certain size font in the adverts. Now somebody uses a slightly different size font.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.